A woman who was incredibly close with Adolf Hitler was Magda Goebbels, the wife of Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister. She was a close companion of the German dictator, and he even offered the Goebbels couple marriage counselling after the pair were engulfed in scandal following Joseph's many affairs. But Magda Goebbels' demise and downfall was one which was incredibly shocking and brutal, as she would choose to poison her family and young children before she too, in the garden of the Reich Chancellery, above the Fuhrerbunker in the final days of the war, decided to die by her own hand. However, after her death, her body was dug up a number of times, and it fell into the hands of the Soviet Secret Service. However, what is the story of the horrific exhumation of Magda Goebbels? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Magda Goebbels was born in 1901 in Berlin, and she was married before she met Joseph. Whilst travelling by train in 1920, she met Gunter Quandt, a rich and wealthy German industrialist who was twice her age, but he wooed her with wealthy gestures and gifts. They married on the 4th of January 1921, and they had a child named Harold. However, her husband had little time for her, and in 1929, Gunther discovered that Magda was having an affair, and they later divorced. But in 1930, Magda was at a meeting of the Nazi Party, when a provocative and passionate speaker, Joseph Goebbels, came onto the stage. She was very impressed by him, and then Magda became more involved in the Nazi Party, and she moved to the party's headquarters in Berlin, and was a secretary to Goebbels' deputy. However, the pair then became romantically involved in 1931, following a trip, and Goebbels said, "We've made a solemn vow to each other. When we have conquered the Reich, we will become man and wife. I am very happy." The pair to begin with were head over heels in love, and Magda's flat would be a place where many senior Nazis, including Hitler, would regularly gather. But the Goebbels relationship did encounter problems, and Joseph was often very jealous of Hitler's affection for Magda, and the couple were married on the 19th of December 1931. But she was very ambitious, and she wanted to be at the very top, and the couple had 6 children, and Hitler was very fond of them. But as mentioned, Magda had a very close relationship with the dictator of Nazi Germany, and she would answer letters from all over Germany from women about domestic issues, and she was seen as a good representative for women. But the Goebbels family lived in luxury, but Joseph had an affair with many women, including the Czech actress Lida Barova, and their affair got more intense, to the point where Joseph was contemplating leaving Magda. But Hitler would intervene, and he refused to allow one of his most senior ministers to be involved in scandal, and he ordered Joseph to break off the affair, and then return to life with Magda, reconciled. But during the war, Magda's first son became a Luftwaffe pilot, but the couple would display utmost loyalty to Hitler in public. But Magda became concerned as the war went on about Hitler, and how the German war effort was going downhill on the Eastern Front. She would state that Hitler no longer listens to the voices of reason. Those who tell him what he wants to hear are the only ones he believes. But she was an ardent Nazi, but it was claimed that she did help a few people with exit visas. But she was a woman who was rather sickly also, and she had a weak heart, and often became very ill. At the end of the war she became depressed, and she also suffered with neuralgia. But as the Second World War came to an end, in April 1945 the Soviets had encircled Berlin, and it was looking likely that the war was lost for the Germans. People who were once loyal to Hitler began to flee and look after their own affairs, but the Goebbels family remained incredibly devoted to Hitler. They believed that life without Hitler was not worth living at all. They moved into the Fuhrerbunker, the Fuhrerbunker's neighbour, which was connected to Hitler's underground headquarters. Magda there wrote to her son Harold, who had been captured in North Africa, and she wrote, "Harold, my beloved son, by now we've been in the Fuhrerbunker for 6 days already. Daddy, your 6 little siblings and I, for the sake of giving our national socialistic lives the only possible honourable end. You shall know that I stayed here against Daddy's will, and that even on the last Sunday the Fuhrer wanted to help me get out. You know your mother, we have the same blood. For me there is no wavering. Our glorious idea is ruined, and with it everything beautiful and marvellous that I've known in my life. The world that comes after the Fuhrer and National Socialism is not any longer worth living, and therefore I took the children with me, for they are too good for the life that would follow, and a merciful God will understand me when I give them salvation. The children are wonderful. There never is a word of complaint or crying. The impacts are shaking the bunker. The elder children cover the younger ones. Their presence is a blessing. They are making the Fuhrer smile once in a while. May God help that I have their strength to perform the last and hardest. We only have one goal left, loyalty to the Fuhrer, even in death. Harold, my dear son, I want to give you what I learned in life. Be loyal. Loyal to yourself, loyal to your people, and loyal to your country. Be proud of us and try and keep us in dear memory. Joseph Goebbels and Magda vowed to not leave Berlin, and Magda supported this, and the decision was made that they too, along with Hitler, would die inside the bunker. Magda was one of the last people to see Hitler and Eva Braun alive, but on the day after they died, Magda and Joseph made the shocking decision to kill their children. They arranged for an SS dentist to inject their children with morphine and then crush an ampoule of cyanide into their mouths. The children were later found, and it was alleged it was Magda who administered the cyanide to her children herself. This would have made Magda a woman who was happy to kill her own children, and she even declined offers to take them away, and she was worried that they would be considered the offspring of war criminals, or that they would fall into the hands of the Soviets. It was said that, straight after Hitler's death, Mrs. Goebbels came down to the bunker with her children. She started preparing to kill them. She couldn't have done that above ground. There were other people there who would have stopped her. That's why she came downstairs, because no one else was allowed in the bunker. She came down on purpose to kill them. 2 hours after the children had been killed, she then went to the Fuhrerbunker and looked very pale and her face was frozen. But now it was time for Magda and Goebbels to go the same way as her children and Hitler. They went for a walk in the garden of the Reich Chancellery, near to where Hitler's remains had been burned, and whilst here they took their own lives. There are differing accounts as to how this happened. One stated that they both bit down on cyanide close to where Hitler had been buried and burned, and then following this, an SS adjutant issued a shot to their heads to make sure they were dead. Goebbels' adjutant, Gunfer Schweigmann, stated that Magda and Joseph walked in front of him up the stairs and into the garden. Schweigmann waited until he heard gunshots. Then he went up and saw their bodies, and Schweigmann then ordered an SS officer to fire several shots into their bodies, which did not move. After this they were covered in petrol and set on fire, but the lack of petrol and fuel in Berlin at the time led to the remains only being partially burned, and they were not buried. It was on the 2nd of May 1945 that the remains were found by the Soviet forces, showing how close the pair were to falling into the hands of the Soviets. Magda's remains were said to have burned better than her husband's, as Joseph's body was recognisable. It was said in a Soviet autopsy that her jawbone and dental remains were found detached in the oral cavity. However, the remains of Goebbels' family, along with Hans Krebs and Hitler's dogs, were then allegedly buried nearby. It was written in an NKVD report that, in the mouth of the corpses, I found glass pieces of wall and of floor corresponding to material in the bunker. There was a strong smell of bitter almonds, the smell of cyanide which killed them. It was said that the bodies in this letter had been buried in a secret location inside a book. However, this was not the end of the story, as Magda Goebbels was exhumed. Schmerz officers were ordered in the summer of 1945, literally months after the bodies had been interred, to dig them up. Hitler, Eva Braun and the Goebbels family were exhumed, and they were then moved to Rafnau, 55 miles from Berlin. But then on the 13th of January 1946, they would be disinterred yet again. They were dug up in Rafnau by a committee led by Schmerz Lieutenant General Selenium. This is where part of Hitler's skull was sent to Stalin, but the bodies were yet again moved, this time to Magdeburg in East Germany. Magda's body was part of this, and in the yard of number 36 West End Street, at the base of a local Schmerz unit, further examinations of the bodies continued. It seemed like the Soviets were only bothered though with the remains of Hitler, and Magda's remains were left probably inside the box he had been initially interred with. But the bodies were then buried inside the courtyard here, in wooden ammunition boxes. Identification reports were sent to Stalin to show that the remains were allegedly of Hitler and Magda Goebbels. But the body of Magda Goebbels remained there for 24 years undetected, and this facility was heavily guarded, and no one would have known who really was buried inside of the courtyard. But 24 years after they were interred, the Kremlin understood that the burial site was about to be given over to the People's Army of the German Democratic Republic. Because of this, Leonid Brezhnev received a letter saying that the bodies of Hitler, Magda and Joseph Goebbels and the others should be disinterred and moved for a final time. Tasked to do this were 3 Smersh agents, Major Shirokov, Captain Kovalenko and Vladimir Gumacek, and they were given gas masks and were told to make it look as if they were dealing with vermin with sulphur, and they did not want to attract attention to the disinterment. They started digging on the 4th of April 1970, and as they began to dig, they found the ammunition boxes containing the remains, and inside one they found Magda Goebbels' gold teeth. The bodies were placed in empty weapon boxes and were taken away in a truck. This truck had fishing rods hanging out the back to disguise what they were carrying, and then in Schönbeck, later that day, the remains of Magda Goebbels and her husband, and Hitler and Eva Braun, were burned along with Hans Krebs. The ashes were then thrown into a sack and taken north, where they were dumped in the Eila River. Magda Goebbels was the wife of Joseph Goebbels, who was incredibly close with Hitler, and she was referred to as the First Lady of Nazi Germany at times. Inside the Reich Chancellery garden, she along with her husband would perish as Berlin was encircled by the Soviets. Her marriage with Goebbels was a strange one at times, and she had a number of affairs, as did her husband, but they were binded by their devotion to Hitler and the Nazi Party. Her remains were dug up a number of times after her death, and each time it would have been a very shocking sight to have seen. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.